So basically, when it drops, he stops. Our locomotive today is the 606, built in 1954 by General Motors Electromotive Division, or EMD, for the Chicago, Milwaukee, St. Paul, and Pacific Railroad, which is more famously known as the Milwaukee Road. This locomotive is classified as an SW1200, the SW meaning switching. It was designed for switching service from freight yards moving the cars around, and the 1200 meaning that 12-cylinder engine produces 1200 horsepower. We acquired it in 2015 from the United States Navy, who owned it at the time. We got it to Chattanooga and restored it back to operation. Now, as we spin around, take a look up in the front of the cab here, and you'll be able to see our engineer, Tyler. He is responsible for operating the locomotive and getting us here and back safely today. So when you can see him, go ahead and give him a wave. Now, while these are commonly referred to as diesel locomotives, the correct term for these engines is actually diesel electric, meaning inside this engine there is a large diesel motor running a generator. That generator produces electricity, and that electricity is fed down to the traction motors that sit on each axle of this locomotive. And it's those traction motors that are actually controlling the locomotive, which is called diesel electric. Diesel locomotives have always made that way, and that's the way they're still made today. Whether it's for Southern, CSM, or Union Pacific, those are all diesel electric. The major difference between the early diesel locomotives and the ones being produced today is that today's modern engines have computer systems in them, as well as produce much more power and are much more fuel efficient. Now, the reason these diesel locomotives would go on to replace the steam locomotives was for one reason, and that was money. The steam locomotives were much more expensive to operate all around. For example, those steam engines spent much more time down for maintenance and repairs. They also had to spend a lot of money on lubricant for those locomotives because of all the exterior moving parts. As well as with the crew members, steam locomotives have to have 2 crew members, while diesel locomotives only need 1. So that's more cost for the staff. And then last, of course, is the fuel. The fuel on the steam locomotive is more expensive than diesel fuel. Now, a big common misconception is that power was the reason. That is actually not the case. Power is not a reason that the steam locomotives were replaced. In fact, most steam locomotives of the day were much more powerful than their diesel locomotive counterparts. Keep going. As a great example, as I mentioned a moment ago, this locomotive built in 1954 only produces 1,200 horsepower. The last steam locomotive you saw at Grand Junction, the 4501, was built in 1911 and it produces 2,500 horsepower. Diesel locomotives did not reach the 2,500 horsepower mark until about the mid-70s. Now, as you can see, we've lined the locomotive up with track 2, even though our train currently sits on track 1. That is so we can do a runaround. What that means is the locomotive is going to go past our train and then through a switch. It will then reverse through the switch back into track 1 to hook up to the other end of the train to pull us the other direction. So what was the front is now the back and vice versa.
Ready, it's going to start turning.
Alright everyone, welcome to East Chattanooga. As you can see here, we have reached the end of the line. So we're going to pull the locomotive onto this turntable and spin it around for the return trip to Grand Junction. This table you're looking at here was constructed in 1916 by the American Bridge Company and was used by the Central of Georgia Railroad in Macon, Georgia at the Roundhouse. That is up until 1925 when they sold it to a branch line based out of Seaton, Georgia. And that branch line used it in a very similar fashion to how we're using it here today. This tape, we acquired it in the 80s, moved to this location, and we've been using it ever since. The table is 80 feet long, and it weighs in at 80 tons. Keep in mind, the average school bus only weighs about 6 or 7 tons. that locomotive there weighs in at 115 tons. So what it is on the table here, the overall weight between the two is going to be sitting very close to 200 tons. So it may surprise you to know that this table was originally table around. Do we have any volunteers? We're going to need 4. We got 1, 2, 3, 1 more, 4. Come on over. Yeah, I'm just kidding. I got you. No, we don't do it that way anymore today. We just use a small 25 horsepower motor under the operator's shed here that our conductor Dave will be operating. Now keep in mind that when they were turning these tables by hand in the early 20th century, they were turning steam locomotives, not diesel locomotives. Those on average weigh a little over 200 pounds. Now if they were turning these tables by hand, and even though they were today, we have to make it so you'll see it drop about it. And that drop Electromotive Division, or EMD, for the Chicago, Milwaukee, St. Paul, and Pacific Railroad, which is more famously known as the Milwaukee Road. This locomotive is classified as an SW1200, the SW meaning switching. It was designed for switching service in the freight yard, moving the cars around, and the 1200 meaning that 12-cylinder engine produces 1200 horsepower. We acquired it in 2015 from the United States Navy, who owned it at the time, and we got it to Chattanooga and restored it back to operation. Now, as we spin around, take a look up in the front of the cab here, and you'll be able to see our engineer, Tyler. He is responsible for operating the locomotive and getting us here and back safely today. So when you can see him, go ahead and give him a wave. Now, while these are commonly referred to as diesel locomotives, the correct term for these engines is actually diesel electric, meaning inside this engine there's a large diesel motor turning a generator. That generator produces electricity, and that electricity is fed down to the traction motors that sit on each axle of this locomotive. And it's those traction motors that are actually propelling the locomotive, hence the term diesel electric. Diesel locomotives have always been made that way, and that's the way they're still made today. Whether it's Norfolk Southern, CSX, or Union Pacific, those are all diesel electrics. The major difference between the early diesel locomotives and the ones being produced today is that today's modern engines have computer systems in them, as well as produce much more power and are much more fuel efficient. Now, the reason these diesel locomotives would go on to replace the steam locomotives was for one reason, and that was money. The steam locomotives were much more expensive to operate all around. For example, those steam engines spent much more time down for maintenance and repairs. They also had to spend a lot of money on lubricants for those locomotives because of all the exterior moving parts. As well as the crew members, steam locomotives have to have 2 crew members, while diesel locomotives only need 1, so that's more cost for the staff. And then last, of course, is the fuel. The fuel on a steam locomotive is more expensive than diesel fuel. Now, a common misconception is that power was a reason. That is actually not the case. Power is not a reason that the steam locomotives are replaced. In fact, most steam locomotives of the day were much more powerful than their diesel locomotive counterparts. Keep going. That's it. As a great example, as I mentioned a moment ago, this locomotive built in 1954 only produces 1,200 horsepower. The last steam locomotive you saw at Grand Junction, the 4501, it was built in 1911 and it produces 2,500 horsepower. Diesel locomotives did not reach the 2,500 horsepower mark until about the mid-70s. Now, as you can see, we've lined the locomotive up with track 2, even though our train currently sits on track 1. That is so we can do a runaround. What that means is the locomotive is going to go past our train and then through a switch. We'll then reverse through the switch back into track 1 and go to the other end of the track, so we'll different directions from the locomotive. Now, so you guys see our talk about before, we're very often involved in a big video for example, the past electricity was reversed on the cast and turner. And we've also done the film such as October Style with a Cold Wall, Dark Wall, such as Marvel Comics, Living Food, London Up 4 and most recently 42, which happened Alright everyone, welcome back aboard. Push on the seats in front of you there to help us get a head start here. Hey, look at that, it worked. And now we're going to pull forward just past our warehouse again here, back up to that switch we had to stop and get on the way over. Because that Chickamauga turn, according to my schedule, should have just left not too long ago. But of course, our main line here is only single track, not double track, meaning trains cannot pass one another. So until they go down that line to what'll be to our left, we will not be able to proceed back to Grand Junction without, of course, having a head-on collision along the way. So we don't want that to happen, so we're going to sit at the switch and wait for them to come by. We'll then throw the switch and proceed back to Grand Junction. Should be sitting there no more than maybe 5 to 10 minutes at the most. Now when that train goes by, you will see it go by to the left. It is the left now, it was the right on the way over, but it'll go down that Beltline hill. And will be pulled by that steam locomotive, the Southern Railway 4501. So you'll get to see that engine in action pulling that train. But it'll be followed by a Southern Railway diesel locomotive, the number 5000, a GP38-2, because Chickamauga, there's nowhere to turn the locomotive around. So the steam engine can only pull it one direction, and it has to get towed by another engine on the way back. So that diesel locomotive can pull things like burgers and nachos instead of the fancier thing that's in the dining car. Now, if anyone's wondering what's normally served in the dining car, the menu is always the same. It consists of an appetizer of tomato bisque. Then you get an entree choice of roast beef, chicken, or salmon, all with sides of mashed potatoes, green beans, bread, and so on. A dessert choice of apple pie, strawberry cheesecake, or chocolate cake, all with ice cream. And then a drink option of water, sweet, unsweet tea, and lemonade. Oh, and coffee as well. If anyone's wondering what's under these tarps to the right of the train, I do get asked about those all the time. Underneath those tarps are diesel motors that are used inside of diesel locomotives. The ones under those tarps are used motors that we have bought at auctions to have here for spare parts when needed. Now when that Chickamauga turn goes down that track to our left there, that is actually the steepest portion of track that any of our trains ever traverse on any of our trips. That track there sits between a 4 and a 5% grade, and what that means is for every 100 feet of lateral motion, it ascends or descends 4 to 5 feet. The story mentions that on the west side, the east side of the ridge, a grandmother lived over there with her granddaughter living on the east side. But they did enjoy going on picnics together every day for lunch. The grandmother would actually walk through the tunnel to take a shortcut every day, but she did know the train schedule, so she knew when it was safe to pass through. But one thing she did not account for, though, was something called extra trains that are not on the actual printed schedule when the extra need rides for more transport of goods. Well, unfortunately, one day while she was walking through the tunnel, an extra passenger train came through running about 60 miles an hour through the tunnel. Of course, that was not nearly enough time at that speed for her to get out of the tunnel. And, well, at that point, the article gets very graphic. But I'll just say every now and then we do